Oh, thank you. Yes, I was muted. My bad. Yeah, hopefully you can hear me now. Sorry, if we've said it so that everyone gets muted when they come in, it mutes me as well, and I don't always notice. So sorry about that. Welcome everyone. If you're now coming in, please turn off your cameras and your audio, please. Mute yourselves. I'll just give it a few seconds for everyone to get ready. Let me know if you can hear me and see me okay. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. Lovely. I think we're all in, aren't we? Okay, fabulous. So welcome everybody, especially if you're new, if you've not been to one of these before. My name is Jo Southall. I am an independent occupational therapist, and I also live with hypermobile EDS, POTS, and some other not particularly fun things. So I'm here this evening to answer any and all of your questions on self-management, on coping with your symptoms. If you've got any questions about anything there, please pop them in the chat, and what I will do is work through them as many as I can until we run out of time. If I don't get through all of them, I will answer those leftover questions at the start of next month's episode. So we're starting fresh today, so whatever goes into the chat now will be what we chat about. Okay, lovely. If you've not been to one of these before, you should have at the bottom of your screen, if you're on desktop or the downloaded version, a little chat box. People are already popping things in there. So I will make a start with questions. So starter, somebody would like to know a little bit more about posture and joint protection. So joint protection is basically a series of kind of rules or recommendations for looking after your joints. And it covers things like how to move, how to carry things, how to sit and stand. It's not, of course, a case of me going, okay, well, you know, here's how you turn on a tap. It's about me saying, here's how you use your hands in general, and then you can apply that knowledge to turning on a tap. So one of the key bits of joint protection is body awareness, and is actually understanding what your body is trying to tell you. So a big part of that is looking at things like chronic pain as an example. So if you are dealing with pain, part of the problem with chronic pain and acute pain overlapping is it can often be quite difficult to work out what is like chronic, what's acute, what's something you should worry about, what's something you can ignore. If you are looking at a load of different kind of sensory feelings from your own body, working those out can be quite a challenge. So what I tend to recommend is dividing pain up into two categories, and that category is useful information and useless information. So if I have chronic back pain that is exactly the same all day, every day, regardless of what I do with myself, with my body, what pills I take, what activities I do, that's useless information. It's unpleasant, but it doesn't tell me anything. Useful information is something like, if I touch a hot surface and it hurts, I know I've burnt myself. It serves a purpose so I can remove myself from danger and stop myself getting further damage. Likewise, if I have an acute ankle injury and walking on it causes pain, it's a good indication that I shouldn't be walking on it because it's damaged. Where it starts to get a little bit more complicated is with the bendy kind of situation where you've got damage maybe, but you've also got kind of acute symptoms as well. So I have chronic low back pain. I've had chronic low back pain since I was 14. That's quite a long time ago now. I also have instability in my sacrum, my sacroiliac joints. So I get acute injuries on top of that low back pain sometimes. How I work out the difference is depending, like working out the difference changes what I'm going to do to manage that situation. So if I have chronic low back pain, but there's no damage, it doesn't really kind of flare up, it's not any kind of injury, I can just kind of ignore that. Or I can take painkillers, or I can use a TENS machine to take the edge off. That's all good. And I can just get on with my life. If I have the sort of injury where there is damage, or my sacroiliac joints have wandered out of place, I need to know that that's a different feeling and that will be treated differently. So in that case, maybe I should avoid certain activities because there's an active injury. Maybe I need to rest more. Maybe I need splints and braces. Maybe I need anti-inflammatories rather than painkillers. So the treatment approach changes based on the kind of injury and the kind of pain that you're dealing with. And this is kind of a foundational part of joint protection, and it can be quite a challenge for a lot of people, because if your body is dealing with all kinds of sensory input and you've got pain, you've got fatigue, you're exhausted, you've got brain fog, you've got weird pot stuff going on, you've got IBS, you've got headache, that's a lot of information. And the default for an awful lot of people is to do our absolute best to ignore absolutely all of it and just push it to the side until we physically can't ignore it anymore, and then curl up in a ball and take 2 days off. So not doing that is a really sensible start to joint protection. Other parts of joint protection are things like being aware of your range of motion. So avoiding the extremes of a range of motion is a good thing if you are not strong enough to do those extremes of motion safely. So there's a big difference between somebody who is a professional yoga instructor doing cool and bendy stretches and somebody like me doing them. Generally speaking, the yoga instructor is physically fitter, is a lot stronger, and is a lot more body aware. So they're better able to utilize their extremes of motion, whereas it's not safe for me to do that. I don't have that level of control. I don't have great muscle tone, all that kind of thing. Yeah. So when we talk about range of motion, it's not a case of me going, as of tomorrow, none of you are ever allowed to hyperextend or overreach ever again. It's about thinking of range of motion as a spectrum. And the spectrum runs between most of the time when I do this activity, I'm fairly safe. And every single time I do this, I end up in A&E. And if you can try to stay down the most of the time I'm fairly safe end of the spectrum, you're going to get slightly fewer injuries. You're going to recover slightly better, and you're hopefully going to get less of that repetitive strain type situation where you've just mildly overdone it, but for your entire body. Joint protection also covers things like splinting. I can't go through all of joint protection today because it would take literally half an hour. But splinting is a key one to talk about. So when splinting and bracing, as an example, I'm wearing a thumb brace right now. If I was to splint and brace every single bit of me that is hypermobile all of the time, I would decondition. And deconditioning is about loss of muscle tone, loss of function, and your body, generally speaking, not being able to do its job on its own. So the more I wear splints and braces, the less work my body actually has to do holding myself together, and it gets lazy. However, splinting and bracing can be a really useful approach if you are post-injury, as an example. So at the beginning of the week, I dislocated my thumb. Since then, whenever I put pressure on my thumb in certain areas or certain directions, I get that really unpleasant, I've done some damage shooting type pain. If I am doing absolutely nothing and I am concentrating on my body, I'm fine without a brace. If I am on a video call, reading comments, watching cameras, trying not to, spill my drink on my desk, all that kind of thing, I'm not concentrating on my hands enough that I can move them and talk and be dramatic safely. So to protect myself from further injury, I'm wearing a splint right now. So that's one approach. So what we do is we look at injuries that are not recovering well because we keep re-injuring them, and we protect that joint with a splint or a brace. The flip side of that is the proactive splinting and bracing side of things. So if I am about to do an injury, if I'm about to do an activity that in the past has fairly consistently led to injury, wearing a brace in advance of that to stop myself getting injured is very sensible. So if I'm going through a flare-up where my wrists are really unstable and I've got an awful lot of pain in my hands and I know that I need to try and cook myself some food, I would put wrist braces on before even attempting to lift a kettle or before attempting to lift a saucepan. Yeah. I would do that proactively because experience has taught me that every single time I try to lift a saucepan during a flare-up and I haven't been wearing wrist braces, I've dislocated something. So now proactively, I will stop that. To counteract the fact that I'm letting my body be dependent on splints and braces some of the time, I've had to increase the amount of physiotherapy I'm doing, the amount of exercise in order to build muscle. but that, generally speaking, can be done in a much safer way than everyday activities. It's a pretty common thing for hypermobile people to be fine doing sport, but to be absolutely ridiculously injury prone and honestly to suffer the worst injuries doing things like sleeping or getting in and out of a cardigan. So one of the things we look at from a rehab perspective is how you can do rehab safely, but also how you can do everyday life safely so that you're not going into the rehab side of things already injured. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview onto some of the joint protection stuff. I do have some resources on my website about joint protection, which you can just go and read for free. So hopefully that will kind of give you a bit of a starting point. We'll probably end up touching on some more of it with other questions as we go through, but I don't want to spend the entire evening on that one topic. So I'm going to whiz ahead a little bit. So the next bit is specifically around shoulder instability. So the shoulder is a difficult joint for bendy people because it has a massive range of motion. It also doesn't have a particularly massive amount of muscle tone on a lot of people. So if you look at the human body, the only other joint that has like a similar range of motion really is the hip. Most people will have more muscle in their bum, their lower back, their hip flexors and their thighs than they do in like a bicep, as an example. So it can be one of those joints where once you've had an injury, things just sort of drop out of socket a little bit. And you may find, particularly if you're tired or not paying attention, that subluxing your shoulders straight down becomes a problem if you've got major instability in that area. You may also find that shoulders are painful during repeat activities. As an example, as a manual wheelchair user, that is a very shoulder intensive activity. It uses an awful lot of force. What you're basically doing is swapping your shoulder and your hip because your legs should be doing the work, but when you are using a wheelchair, they aren't. So shoulder pain is a pretty common issue for a lot of wheelchair users. One of the big things to have a think about here is your pushing action. So quite often you're given a wheelchair, but nobody sits you down and teaches you how you're supposed to push it. And it feels like it should be quite intuitive, but what an awful lot of hypermobile people do is cheat exercise. So we will complete a motion in a way that looks like we're doing it normally, but we're not using the right muscle groups and we're not in the right position. And we're generally just doing it a little bit awkwardly. And it's a really, really common thing from a physiotherapy perspective to be doing the right action. And it looks like you're doing it right, but you're not actually using the right muscles. So if you find you're doing an activity and you're either getting a lot of pain from it when you don't think you should, or you're not getting any benefit out of it, you're not gaining any fitness or stability, it may be that you are accidentally doing this cheat exercise thing. So that might be a good thing to have a talk about. It is perfectly reasonable to refer yourself to physiotherapy for advice on how to propel a wheelchair. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And they'll be looking at things like which muscle groups you should be using. A really common thing for a lot of hypermobile people to do is to overuse your pectoral muscles and to underuse your upper back muscles. That's particularly true for anyone who is maybe a little bit bustier on top. We tend to compensate for that by like hunching over a bit because the weight distribution is a bit wonky. So learning to use your back muscles to push is a really important part of wheelchair use. You may also find that you have a bit of hypermobility as a problem, but you can also have muscle imbalances or muscle weaknesses in key areas. So I went through a phase of shoulder instability so severe that I was getting maybe 20 or 30 total shoulder dislocations per day. And I was super desperate. And I was at the point where I thought the only thing that would fix it was surgery. I was in shoulder braces constantly. I was getting numbness in my hands. It was horrendous. What eventually turned that around was seeing a specialist physiotherapist who spent 45 minutes looking at just my shoulders. That was it. Didn't even get to the rest of my body. What he worked out was that I had a very specific weakness to one of the kind of structures in my upper back. And once we fixed that, my shoulder dislocations went from multiple times daily to maybe once or twice a month. So yes, I'm still hypermobile. Yes, I can still sublux my shoulders and do so on a semi-regular basis. But it was a huge improvement just by getting my muscles doing their job properly. So a physiotherapy referral would be a very sensible thing to consider if you're having a lot of pain in that area. In most places in the UK, you can now self-refer to physiotherapy. So if you just look up your postcode and physiotherapy self-referral, generally speaking, you'll find like an online form you can fill in, and then you send that off. And the people at the other end will sort of triage you, give you a ring, ask you some questions, and get you booked in from there. So you don't need to go via your GP, which is particularly helpful for those of you who may have slightly obstructive GPs, which is an issue. So yeah, hopefully that helps a little bit. Okie dokie. Next question, how do you get diagnosed with POTS? So for those of you that maybe haven't come across POTS or are a little bit newer to this, it's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And POTS is one of the things under the spectrum of kind of autonomic wonkiness that a lot of us will fall into. POTS is kind of one other sort of area, but autonomic dysfunction covers a whole load of different things that can go wrong with your autonomic system. So your autonomic system is responsible for things like your heart rate, your blood pressure, your body temperature, how much you pee, how much adrenaline you've got in your system at any given time, sweating, all kinds of stuff like that, and digestion as well. So if you have issues with your autonomic system, your body basically gets worse at regulating the systems that are supposed to regulate themselves. A typical way that presents is with things like a sudden increase in heart rate when you stand up. It may also present with things like syncope or getting really, really hot and sweaty and out of breath, doing something as simple as going up the stairs. A lot of people will find they get dizzy if they stand up too quickly, all kinds of things like that. So POTS is an interesting one because the diagnostic criteria for POTS is very, very specific. And very specifically, it's during something called a tilt table test, where they lay you down on a bench, hook you up to all of the gadgets and gizmos that could possibly be needed to regulate your heart rate, body temperature, and record all that information. And they'll lay you down until you're completely relaxed and your heart rate is settled into your nice low resting heart rate. And then they'll sit you up to about 75, 80 degrees. And they will leave you there for about 10 minutes. You're not allowed to talk, and they just record all of the stuff that happens. The only exception to that is if you want to point out that you've developed a symptom. As an example, you feel dizzy or you feel sick. If your heart rate increases by 40 beats per minute within the first 10 minutes of you being upright, you meet the criteria for POTS. The issue here is that because it's so specific, there is an awfully large subset of people who have an increase in heart rate, feel terrible, but don't meet the criteria for POTS because their change in heart rate is 38 beats per minute. So basically, it's a bit of a problem. So what we can say is that you have autonomic dysfunction. That can be a thing that you say, but you can't say you have POTS unless you meet that criteria, or a cardiologist bends the rules a little bit because it's really obvious you've got something going on. Around a third of people with POTS will also have syncope as a diagnosis. So syncope is the fancy medical word for passing out. What tends to happen with people who get a syncope diagnosis as well is that during the start of the tilt table test, when they move you from horizontal to upright, your blood pressure drops. And if it drops enough, a lot of people will pass out. So I have a syncope diagnosis, but I've never passed out because although my blood pressure does drop quite dramatically, I just don't get the kind of passing out symptoms. What typically happens is I'll get kind of whooshing or sounds in my ears, my vision will go black or sparkly or grey, and I'll make myself sit down really, really quickly. But if you've got naturally low blood pressure and you get that sudden drop in blood pressure, then you'll probably find you're out cold very, very quickly. So it's not a necessary thing for POTS, but there is quite a significant overlap. About a third of people will have both. So that's basically how it works from a POTS perspective. What can happen now, because a lot of people with long COVID, as an example, are having POTS type symptoms. So the waiting list for tilt table tests at the moment is horrendous. It's been bad for a long time, but it's even worse now than it used to be. So what a lot of people are doing are getting a poor man's tilt table, which is basically just you lay down, your GP or your cardiologist puts you on a little fingertip pulse oximeter thing and a blood pressure cuff, and then they make you stand up. And while you're standing up, they'll do the readings immediately, again at 5 minutes and again at 10 minutes. And if any of those catches a significant jump, you really don't need the tilt table because it's kind of obvious you've already got POTS. So that's typically how it works. When you've got your POTS diagnosis, or if you've got some kind of weird autonomic issue, but you don't quite tick the right boxes, there are a couple of things that become really quite important. The first one is maintaining really, really good hydration. So a lot of people with POTS will find that they have naturally slightly lower blood pressure, or they don't cope well with their blood pressure being normal to low. So being really well hydrated is super important. And that doesn't just mean drinking water. It also means adding in salt or electrolytes to your diet. If you just drink a load of water, it will just make you pee an awful lot, and that's not doing you any good. If you have the salt and the electrolytes in there as well, your body can actually make better use of that to increase your blood volume. The other thing that a lot of people benefit from is compression stockings. So even something as simple as buying yourself some flight socks from Sainsbury's or your local pharmacy or wherever will help. But a lot of people find that medical, like class 2 compression stockings, are really helpful. If you are prone to knee injuries or you get any kind of puffiness in your knees or your ankles, I would recommend going for thigh-high compression stockings. Either have like hold up ones or wearing them with a suspender belt, simply because a lot of people find if they've got like knee length compression but they've also got knee problems, it makes your knees puff up a little bit, just having compression stockings cut in at that knee area. So compression and hydration are your two key starting points, and a lot of people with POTS will be recommended to drastically increase their salt intake. And I do mean salt with everything you cook with, extra salt. My favorite kind of go-to summer heat wave snack is just sliced up tomatoes with a load of rock salt on, you know, so lots more fluids and lots more salt intake will probably be really, really helpful. A lot of people will also find they aren't medicated for that. So beta blockers or medications to kind of restore normal heart rate, or medications to increase your blood pressure, or your vasoconstrictors to basically keep all of your functional blood pressure in your core rather than pulled in your ankles. So there's quite a lot of different medications out there that can be really helpful as well. So I hope that's useful information there. Best joint or muscle strengthening exercises, specifically for hips and lower back. So I'm not a physiotherapist. I do have physiotherapy students come and train with me sometimes, which is a good thing. So I've picked up a few hints and tips, and I've been a physiotherapy patient for 20 years or so at this point. Generally speaking, I would recommend seeing a physiotherapist. Your other option is a wonderful lady called Gina DeBon, who is a movement therapist and hypermobility specialist, and does a lot of exercise programs based specifically around the sorts of problems that hypermobile folks have, but also the challenges that we have around like managing those kinds of issues. So dizziness whilst exercising, as an example. Gina DeBon, yeah, so I'm hoping my link fairy will find a link to her website. I'm hoping Jeannie will be joining me for a couple of live streams in a few months' time. So if you have questions specifically for her, stay tuned for updates there. We'll see how that goes. I just need to bully her into joining me. So yeah, hopefully that will be a good one. Swimming is also brilliant exercise, Pilates. If you don't have repeat issue knee problems, cycling, specifically recumbent cycling, can be really, really good as well. Pilates is another one that works really well for a lot of people. Okay, next question. Sleeping with instability in shoulders and neck. Okay, sleeping is probably the activity where people get most badly injured. If I had to pick a key dangerous activity for the hypermobile population, sleeping would be it. One thing you may find is that if you're specifically for side sleepers, back sleepers tend to have less issues with shoulders, but side sleepers find that the shoulder they're laying on either gets squashed, or your top shoulder will sort of drift towards your ear and end up subluxing or getting kind of weird spasmy things going on there. So if you're sleeping on your shoulder and that one is a problem, I would, let me just awkwardly move my desk back a bit so I can recreate sleeping here. Oh, okay. So if you're sleeping on your side, what you don't want to be doing is sleeping completely on that shoulder. So if you take a pillow and pop it behind you, and then you lay on your side and roll back ever so slightly, what it will do is distribute your body weight across that pillow and take some of the pressure off your shoulder. But it still feels like you're side sleeping, so it's okay. It doesn't feel like you have to sleep on your back. The other issue there for people who find that their top shoulder is the problem, the armpit pillow is the way to go. So this is a bit big, really. What I would typically recommend is those sort of decorative scatter cushions that people don't think have any use beside looking pretty. So I've got a tiny little cushion about that big. And what I do is sleep with it under my armpit and then just anchoring my shoulder in like that. So what this does is create a little bit of tension here, and it just stops my shoulder from wandering out of socket here. Yeah. So armpit pillows are absolutely a brilliant way to go, and I very much recommend them. You may also get the same benefit from teddy bears or hot water bottles or wheat bags or pretty much anything that you can put under your armpit that will just anchor it and join a little bit. If you find sleeping is particularly kind of repeatedly causing you dislocations or subluxations, I would actually recommend speaking to either a physio or an orthotist about that, because there is kind of a limited amount of evidence for splinting while you sleep if sleeping is causing the problem. So there are a couple of splints and braces that are designed specifically to be slept in, and those are mostly wrist and ankle braces. But during periods of extreme instability, I have slept in shoulder braces because sleep was the thing causing the repeat injury. So it might be worth having a go there. Compression tops can also be really, really useful, because that extra body awareness, that extra sensory feedback allows you to basically keep your body, your body slightly more aware of what's going on, that kind of thing. Sorry, just recline that back again. Yeah, so hopefully that helps a little bit. Neck instability is a slightly more difficult one. If you are getting neck injuries from sleeping, I would really strongly suggest some physiotherapy input, because what that implies to me is that the muscles in your neck are basically quite lazy and would require a little bit of extra work to get them in tip-top condition. If you find that you struggle with that, the first thing I would also do is check out pillows. So what you want to do as a side sleeper is have your pillow fill the gap between your neck and your shoulder, so that you're keeping basically support here and your neck is still in a nice neutral position there. If you find that no pillow makes a difference, back sleeping specifically designed pillows, neck contour pillows still don't make a difference, that is the sort of thing you really do need to speak to your GP about and get yourself a specialist referral to look into it, because not kind of being able to sleep comfortably, sleep is really, really important to our overall health, and getting constant sleep injuries is not a good thing. So if in doubt, kind of do ask around about that and see if you can get some specific support around building up a little bit of strength, building up some stability, and some maybe advice on kind of what pillows and things might be useful. It sounds a bit weird, but if you can get somebody to take a photo of you in your normal sleeping position, sometimes what we can't do with poor proprioception, poor body awareness, is work out why things are causing us problems. But sometimes when you look at a photo of yourself and you immediately see that you are in fact a human pretzel, it's really easy to see why that position is causing problems, even if it actually feels comfortable. So photos of yourself in positions that you think are okay but might actually be causing a problem is a sensible thing to do. Okay, lovely. Hopefully that helps a little bit, and I'm going to move on again. Tips for dealing with hip bursitis. That sounds like a familiar problem. I have had a couple of years of hip bursitis that have not been fun at all. For those of you that maybe haven't been diagnosed with this before, it is quite a common one for hypermobile people. A key diagnostic, like clinical significant thing for this is if you cannot sleep on your side, because of a weird kind of burning, achy pain when you lay on your hip, I would bet my house that you have bursitis. It's just a really kind of specific feeling, and I've never had it from any other injury in my life, but burning, achy pain when you lay on it, I would put money on it being bursitis. Physiotherapy can be really effective for this in a couple of ways. The first one is that if your muscle tone is better, your body supports itself better. So you're less likely to kind of inflame key areas. The second one is that bursitis very often runs alongside a condition called gluteal tendinopathy. I'm not going to get into massive amounts of detail about this, but basically, if you can get your glutes and your hip muscles working more effectively, that might calm down, which in turn calms down the bursitis. The most effective treatment for a lot of people here are things like ice and anti-inflammatories. If you're regularly applying ice and you are regularly and consistently taking anti-inflammatories and you're still not getting any relief from that, please speak to your GP about a referral to get some steroid injections. So steroid injections are not fun. You will very much not enjoy the short-term procedure. But what it can do is give you a window of kind of pain-freeness. And in that time period where you are relatively pain-free, you push yourself hard to build as much muscle tone as you can and to get your hips as stable as possible and your glutes working as well as possible. And the hope is that having that window of limited pain will allow you to make significant rehab progress. Whereas if you're working with an awful lot of pain, it's really easy to plateau and not to be able to make that progress because it's a kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, too much pain, not enough sleep type situation. So hopefully that's some useful advice maybe, but you may find the pillow trick where you roll backwards a little bit onto a pillow also works for bursitis because your shoulders and like the hip bursa bit line up. So getting a little bit of pressure relief there can be really useful, and sleeping with a pillow between your knees as well. The other thing it's worth looking into are memory foam toppers if you don't have a memory foam mattress, because it just gives you a little bit of extra support. You may also find that topical pain relief stuff, so like your CBD balms, your Tiger Balm, that kind of thing, deep freeze gels, that sort of thing, applied just before bed, help giving you enough pain relief to actually get to sleep. So those are all kind of worth a go as well. But bursitis is a thing that medically speaking is treatable with steroid injections quite effectively. So do speak to your GP if you haven't already done that. Okay. Do I have any tips for pacing? Yes, I do. So we're looking to have like energy and autonomic functioning left at 10:30 at night. Okay, so one of the things it's worth having a think about if you are forced into doing things at a time that doesn't normally suit you is, can you move other aspects of your life to better accommodate that? So I am the exact opposite of a morning person, which means an awful lot of my like day-to-day housework things occur like in the evenings or quite late. So I've basically moved my work and functioning hours, shifted the whole lot of my life around to accommodate the fact that I need to be up better in the evenings because that's when my brain works best. Obviously, I'm in a very privileged situation in that I don't have kids to get to school, as an example, so I can just sleep in and move my time frame over. That's not how it works for everyone. With pacing, I think a lot of people get the hang of taking breaks more often, but we still take breaks too late. So if you're pacing instinctively, what tends to happen is you take a break when you start to feel tired or when you start to get a lot of pain. That's too late. Ideally, people should be taking breaks before they've had any symptom escalation whatsoever. So one of the ways we can start to do that is with activity alternating. So typically we get a do a thing, have a break kind of approach. The difficulty with making yourself take breaks like that is that we don't take enough, and it's primarily because taking breaks and doing nothing is boring. So we feel like we need to keep going. With activity alternating, what you can start to do is rest bits of your body by alternating between different areas. So if I'm doing an activity like this is quite cognitively heavy for me. I'm reading, I'm concentrating, I'm talking, I'm trying to focus on the screen. But physically, it's really easy because I'm in bed. I've got my feet up. I'm quite comfy. All good. My brain and my eyes are going to need a break after this. But if I am going to, as an example, get my body going, I might go and load the dishwasher, because that will give me a little bit of body movement, but it will also give my brain a rest, and I won't have to talk while I'm doing it, and my eyes can just kind of zone out a little bit. So chopping and changing between physical and cognitive tasks can be a good thing to do, but you also need to put in some restorative stuff. So things that bring you joy or allow you to unwind or relax. If you are thinking about this now and trying to divide your life up into different categories, you may find that there are some tasks that are both physical and cognitive, or are relaxing but also physically draining. Think of it like a little Venn diagram, basically. So you've got physical, cognitive, and restorative tasks in there. If you're doing an activity that overlaps a lot of these categories, you may still need to follow that with total rest. But with the activity alternating approach, you can start to maybe just do little bits of things. So if the bathroom needs cleaning, fine, absolutely no way I can do all of it in one go. But if I've just been to the loo, I can wipe down the sink with the spray that I keep in the bathroom while I wash my hands, and that's one bit done. And then I can go and send a couple of emails. And next time I go to the loo, I can put a bit of bleach in the toilet bowl. So breaking things up into smaller amounts, but also chopping and changing between what you're doing can be really effective. The other key strategy I talk about a lot for pacing, thank you, brain fog, for pacing is micro breaks. So all we're talking about are 10 to 30 seconds of not doing the thing you're currently doing. So it's a little bit harder to do while I'm actively talking for an entire hour, but generally speaking, if I am going about my day, what I will do is just pause whenever I can, have a little bit of a fidget, grab a sip of drink, have a think about what I'm doing with my life. Ask myself a couple of key questions. Am I too hot? Am I too cold? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I need the loo? Have I got a headache? During that Q&A little body check-in phase, if I notice anything, like my thumb's hurting or my back hurts or I've been standing up for too long, as soon as I notice it, I'll do something about it. And being really, really proactive about symptom management makes it easier to get on top of those symptoms. So in the same way that sometimes if you've had a really bad headache for a couple of hours, it isn't till you get to the second dose of paracetamol that it does something. If you noticed that headache the second it started to creep in at the back of your mind, and you turned off your computer, had a 15-minute break, got really well hydrated and had some fresh air, you may not actually ever get to the point where you need painkillers and darkened room, because you've got ahead of that. And that's a really important part of the self-management stuff, because we're all going to have a lot of symptoms that are chronic, right? But what we don't need is to also be hungry, thirsty, dehydrated, to have a headache, to have extra back pain, and to have seized up from typing for too long. So getting on top of the stuff that we can control makes it easier to kind of manage the stuff that we can't. So everyone can have like a little bit of a stretch and fidget now. And I'm going to have a sip of drink before I go on to the next question. Okay. First time here, welcome new person. Recently starting going to the gym, and I've been having more energy in general. Excellent. And I've been able to do things more, but I'm struggling with pacing and feel like my boom and bust cycle is worse now. How can I save myself from getting too excited to go to the gym often and pace better? In other words, pacing tips for when you're in a better place, please. Fabulous. I love that, like, we're getting a pro exercise kind of theme here, which is really good. One of the things about going to the gym is that we often feel like if we've made the effort to leave the house, we have to do like a lot to justify that. Like if you've gone to the gym, you must do a lot of stuff in the gym. You don't have to do a lot of stuff in the gym. You can go to the swimming pool and you can do 5 lengths and you can have a coffee and you can go home. That's fine. It's actually very sensible to do a little bit. What tends to happen is if you're in that boom and bust thing, when you go to the gym, you do a lot, and then you crash, and then you can't go to the gym for a bit. So when you go back to the gym, you again feel like you have to do loads to make up for the fact that you've not done very much before that. Whereas if you can get yourself into the habit of doing just about enough, you might be able to go to the gym more often. And if you've got a gym membership, that actually is a much more financially sensible way to do things, because you are making good use of said membership. If you are struggling with that approach, you may find that exercising at home is a good way to go, because it's easier to convince yourself to do this much if you're in your own home, because you can do this much again in 4 hours' time. So part of the difficulty may be that actually so much pressure is on like the gym side of things that you feel like you have to do loads then. If you can get little bits of exercise done during the week, or you can have a look at the rehab side of things to maybe make your recovery a bit more effective, you may find it's easier to do the gym side of things without the kind of crash afterwards. So things like, don't forget your basic first aid stuff. So ice can be really effective for like muscle recovery, pain management, that kind of thing. Massage, warm up and cool down, really, really effective and really important. Magnesium is brilliant for muscle recovery. So magnesium sprays and gels can be great, particularly if you're prone to like spasms and cramps, that kind of thing. All that stuff can be really, really useful. And hopefully then you don't feel like you have to do everything in the gym in that one session, and you can actually just go more often and crash a little bit less afterwards. I hope that's making a little bit of sense. Other things may be having a look at compression clothing. One of the issues with hypermobile folks is that we tend to not be particularly body aware. If you're not very body aware, you don't notice little bits of injury. If you are more aware of your body, you're more likely to notice when you're like wobbling or straining things or overdoing it. And that allows you to make corrections to your posture, your movement, your general body awareness. You can look after yourself a bit better if you notice these things happening. And compression clothing can really help with that extra sensory feedback that allows you to work out what you're actually doing to yourself in the short term, rather than getting, say, 20 teeny tiny little micro injuries, thinking you're fine, and the next morning waking up feeling like you've been hit by a bus, which is what tends to happen when bendy people try and exercise properly. So body awareness is very sensible, but equally, if you're going to the gym, go to the gym for 3 hours and have a break in the middle. Lay down, read a book, check your phone, play solitaire, whatever you need to do to make yourself have a break. Evaluate how you're feeling and make sensible choices about what you do next based on that evaluative kind of check-in thing. So hopefully that is a useful one. Yeah, best of luck with the gym. Okie dokie. If using rock tape or KT tape to support joints, oh, let's just scroll up again, hang on. To support joints such as kneecaps, is there an issue of using it too frequently? I found that if I wear it for about 5 days, then I get 5 to 7 days where my knees are good, and then they need taping again. I'm not sure if this is going to, sorry, just keep scrolling down. I'm not sure if this is going to weaken things in the long term, or whether it's actually going to be helpful to increase the time between the taping. Hopefully increasing the time between the taping as my knees have the chance to recover and get stronger. The only issue I've ever come across with using tape regularly is like skin damage from the adhesive. So if your skin is in perfectly good condition and it's benefiting you, go right ahead. If you find that KT tape works really, really, really well for you, there are a couple of companies that make custom-made compression garments. And these compression garments have got like almost tape-like kind of patterns and panels built into them. So you can get a pair of leggings that is effectively compression leggings with built-in like tape support for your knees. And you may find that's a more kind of economical way to go about it rather than getting through 10 miles of the stuff every year. But generally speaking, most people don't have issues using it on a regular basis. I would hope that having 5 to 7 days with no knee injuries is actually a really, really good thing in terms of building up some strength and stability, but also in terms of pain management, getting your pain levels down nice and low before you get rid of the tape again is a really good way to manage the kind of chronic side of things. So I think that's going to be really, really sensible. If you have any concerns or doubts about that, speaking to a physiotherapist might be a sensible idea. Hopefully they can give you some advice around when you can use that most effectively. I believe my current some of my current students and past students are in the meeting today. So Josh, if you are there and you've got any tips, stick them in the chat. So my current physiotherapy student is trained to do tapey stuff. So I'm going to tag him in and hope he has some comments to share. Lovely. Okie dokie. My 13-year-old son has hypermobility in his hands and feet, which I only discovered when homeschooling during lockdown when I saw his struggles with writing. I arranged for an OT to work with him over Zoom. The outcome was an improvement using different writing implements. However, he still has regular and significant amount of pain in hands and feet. One of the issues is his feelings of shame or embarrassment, which distresses me as a mum. So he's not agreeable to accepting support at school. How can I help him with this? What can I do to help that is under the radar? In his eyes. Thank you. Oh, this is heartbreaking. It makes me very, very sad when people aren't comfortable and confident enough to use kind of assistive aids. One of the things that can really help with this is for the things that you use to be really kind of cool and fun, and to just, generally speaking, like show a bit of personality. I think the difficulty with a lot of kind of OT, like aids, like disability themed stuff, is that it's beige and old person-y and very kind of sad looking. But if you can get things that are like fun and bright colors and have some kind of joy involved in them, it's easier to get people to like use stuff, you know. So the other thing, it might be worth speaking to the school about what support is available that can be done kind of stealthily. So things like pacing can be really effective for this. If he got into the habit, as an example, of at the end of every paragraph, putting down a pen and just stretching his hands out and having a little bit of a rest, a bit of massage to get rid of the pain, and then picking his pen up and going back to work. That's the sort of thing that I guarantee you absolutely nobody will notice. And yet it can have quite a profound effect on pain levels by proactively taking breaks. Because what you've probably worked out is that too much of the holding the pen stuff causes that kind of crampy, unpleasant feeling in your hands. So getting like regular breaks, but stealthily, is a really sensible thing to start doing. Likewise, some kind of code between him and the teachers that lets them know that he's struggling, but without making it really obvious and public in the school. So it may be ways that he can just take 5 minutes in a corridor as if it's a toilet break, but actually it's just to kind of rest, have a fidget break, get some kind of pain relief, that kind of thing. Might be a sensible thing to do. Likewise, if he's got friends he's particularly close with, maybe getting them involved rather than it being like a whole public thing. But a little bit of acceptance from a close friend can go a really long way, and that might be a useful thing to try. Compression gloves are something that I do recommend quite regularly for like hypermobile hands. Cool, fun compression gloves are a bit better. So Chronically Colourful is a really nice company, and they make, I say company, it's a person, it's a one-person thing. They make tie-dye compression gloves, which are a lot more fun than the beige shiny ones that OTs are so fond of giving out to people that are super sad and horrible looking. So yeah, custom made compression stuff would be useful. Tie-dye fun stuff. Likewise, different kinds of pens can be really effective. So my favorite pen to recommend, particularly for kind of kids and adolescents, is the Pen Again, which just literally looks like a rocket ship, but it's kind of slots over your finger and holds onto itself. And it's a really useful way to kind of basically have a nice pen that you don't have to grip as tightly, and it can help a lot with hand pain, but at the end of the day it is still a pen. Like, people can just buy these It's not a particularly standout difficult thing to use. Plenty of people use them just because they're nice to write with. And it may be, yeah, pen again, that's the one. It may be that this is the sort of thing that would be subtle enough, even if it's only being used at home for homework. That would probably still have a big impact on how much pain he's in at the start of the school day. So even just using the stuff at home would be beneficial. And hopefully, you know, confidence will build. If he's using stuff at home that works really, really well, and it makes enough of a difference, it may kind of convince him to try it at school a little bit. If people at school either don't care or are actively supportive, that positive feedback will hopefully encourage him to keep using it. So I hope that's a little bit useful, but school is a really difficult time for kids and teens. I hated school. I must say that, like, university is much, much easier. I have done an awful lot of my lectures laid on the floor and absolutely nobody cares. Quite often people will come and sit next to me. So yeah, hopefully, like, further education, things get a little bit easier. And after the awkward teenage years, bodily acceptance is a much more normal and pleasant thing. So best of luck with the future for that. I hope that's helpful. The compression people, again, for the gloves in particular, was chronically colourful, and the custom-made compression orthotics was DMO. So if Link Fairy hasn't managed to find those, or my students haven't found them all because they're here too, I'll grab some links to share afterwards. Okay. Any good tips with stopping injury and increased pain in wrists when using a wheelchair or crutches? My right wrist is unstable and forearm crutches have not worked for me. I do splint, but struggling to find a splint that still allows movement to self-propel a wheelchair. Yeah, okay. So the first thing I would say is regular old forearm crutches are not good for wrist function. They cause an awful lot of problems. There are different kinds of crutches available that can be a lot better. So gutter crutches, basically your forearm rests on the crutch and your hand just kind of goes around a handle, rather than putting all of your weight through your wrists, basically. If you find that a hybrid between regular forearm crutches and gutter crutches is what you're after, then there's a company called Smart Crutch who make angle adjustable crutches, which are absolutely fabulous. There are a couple of other brands of ergonomic crutches now that are creeping in that are starting to be a little bit more just friendly towards your wrists by distributing weight through your forearm. So that might be a good thing to do. If you find that gutter crutches aggravate your shoulders, then Smart Crutches would definitely be what I would recommend, because you can go 45 degrees and get kind of the best of both worlds without flaring up too many other things. So hopefully that kind of is worth trying. In terms of splints and braces, it may be that you need general wrist braces for like everyday stuff, and then you need a lighter weight splint that supports your wrists a bit but still allows you the range of motion you need to self-propel. From a wheelchair use perspective, it's perfectly reasonable for you to go to orthotics and say, I need wrist braces that are wheelchair compatible, and expect an orthotist to find some for you. This isn't something you're expected to just do yourself. If you can't access an orthotist or you haven't got appropriate support, do drop me an email. What I would have a think about, though, is if you're regularly finding the injury is preventing you from using mobility aids. Firstly, like a little bit of advice around exercises to build some strength up in your wrists would be sensible, but also consider different propelling techniques. So if you can afford them, like a power assist option for a wheelchair is brilliant. It will make things much easier. If you can't, toe propelling is a thing. So if you can fold the footrests out of the way for your wheelchair and walk your feet along while you self-propel, particularly just for things like getting up ramps or hopping up curbs, that can make a massive difference by just giving you a little bit of help from your feet. But it's also quite good exercise for your lower body. So toe propelling is a thing that you can do that may help with that. One of the wrist braces it might be worth having a look at is it's the Medi, I think it's pronounced Manumed, but it's by a company called Medi. If you Google Medi wrist braces, you'll find it. MEDI, and it's kind of like a kind of purpley blue color. In that is a plastic stay to support the wrist, but it's removable. So it may be, and I have used it with my wheelchair without problems, but you may find if you remove the plastic bit, you still get a bit of support, but you've got a better range of motion to go with it. So that would probably be the wrist brace that I would recommend most. But if you've got any concerns about that being right for you, do let me know and we can have a chat about that. Yeah, I think that's probably the way to go. Hopefully that's helpful. Orthotics as a department is something you can be referred to on the NHS. So an orthotist is basically a splint and brace person. If you ask your GP for an orthotics referral, because you need advice for splinting and bracing, that's a thing that you can just get referred to. I would definitely recommend orthotics referrals if you're looking at knee braces or shoulder braces as an example, because the good ones are very, very expensive. So as an example, my current pair of, like my last pair of knee braces retailed for about 650 quid each. Orthotics paid for those without batting an eyelid. If I'd had to pay for that myself, would have just opted not to walk anymore because it's cheaper to be a wheelchair user. But yeah, so orthotics is a thing you can get referred to, and they will hopefully be able to sort you out some splints and braces from that. What they can normally do is bring things in for you to try. If you put them on in clinic and try to push yourself in a wheelchair and can't do it, obviously they're useless. Orthotics can send them back and order you something else. So hopefully that's given you some advice / is useful. Okie dokie. If I missed the question, I'm confused myself now. Hang on. Just scrolling through the chat. I thought there was a question about whether you can have POTS and high blood pressure, but now I can't find it. The answer is yes. In fact, there's a specific type of POTS that tends to come with high blood pressure. Hyperadrenergic, I think is how it's pronounced, but basically it's normally abbreviated to hyperPOTS. So I actually, when I'm not on very high doses of beta blocker, do have high blood pressure and POTS, but I also get a drop in blood pressure when I stand. So you can even have a syncope diagnosis and high blood pressure. It is very possible to have all of the things. The only difference is that it depends what medication you'll be treated with. What you don't want to do with high blood pressure is go on something like midodrine, as an example, midodrine, which increases your blood pressure to cope with POTS. So it will probably mean that the type of medication your POTS is treated with depends on whether you've naturally got high, normal or low blood pressure and whether or not you've got a syncope diagnosis. So, but all of that is generally speaking for either your GP or your cardiologist to work out. But yes, just to say, you can have all of the different kinds of blood pressure and POTS at the same time. Okay. How do you know the difference between injury pain and chronic pain? So injury pain, typically anything sharp or stabby tends to be an injury pain. Anything you've had for 6 months that doesn't flare up or go away tends to be a chronic pain. Basically, chronic pain is just pain that you've had for 6 months or longer. So you can have an injury pain that becomes chronic pain because you've had it for so long. If you, from day to day, have both, you may find that other ways of noticing things are useful. So as an example, if you have recently fallen down the stairs, chances are the pain flare immediately following that is injury pain. If you've got swelling or bruising, that's a good indication there's injury pain. If you find that your range of motion is suddenly restricted or there is a big change from the previous day, that's typically an injury pain. So if it's changed, if it's new, or if you've also got swelling, bruising, inflammation, sudden range of motion changes, those things tend to indicate an injury. Or if there was a specific incident that you regularly recall, as an example, falling off a curb and twisting your ankle, or picking something heavy up and suddenly getting a stabby pain, those things tend to be kind of injury, whereas other stuff that's maybe a slower onset, doesn't have bleeding, bruising, inflammation along with it, or you've had it for a long time, tends to be a chronic issue. If you have a new sudden onset, really horrendous thing, do get it checked out. Having hypermobility does not excuse, you know, the NHS from not giving you emergency care. So if you've got a new thing and you don't know what you've done and it's really like painful and you don't know how to manage it, see somebody, see a doctor, speak to a doctor, go to A&E, all that kind of thing. Every single good healthcare professional out there would rather you came in 20 times with something that turned out to be minor than you didn't come in the one time it turned out to be serious. So if in doubt, speak to a doctor is kind of good advice to live by. Okie dokie. Gastroparesis diagnosis. Okie dokie. So gastroparesis, very simply, is paralysis or poor kind of digestive transit through the digestive system. This is probably going to have to be my last question because I've just looked at the time and realized we should be finished already. Gastroparesis is not typically kind of diagnosed through gastric testing. So what they will do is do gastric emptying studies where you eat something with like a radioactive isotope in it that they can see on imaging, and they will track how long it takes your digestive system to actually do its job and move that from like A to B. If you are excuse me, if you are tested for this, like if you're referred to look at that, the doctors will talk you through the whole process. Not necessarily for gastroparesis, but again, sort of like POTS, there's an awful lot of people who don't have gastroparesis but do have very slow, lazy digestive transit. So there's kind of like a spectrum, and you've got gastroparesis on one end and normal digestion on the other. An awful lot of people fall into that kind of middle ground as well. And that may be looking at things like, actually food diaries can be a good indicator of like how long it's taking things from get to A to B. If you feel like your stomach is full for a really long time after eating, or you if you're prone to like vomiting and you regularly vomit up like completely undigested food, those are good indicators that there's something a little bit lazy or a little bit slow or a little bit gastroparesis-y kind of thing going on. So that would be the sort of thing you should raise with a doctor. It may be that you see a dietitian. It may be that they want to do gastric testing, at which point you would see a gastroenterologist. But these are all things that would kind of go via the doctors, if that makes sense. Okie dokie. I think I'm going to have to stop there, but what I'm just going to do is skip to the bottom and answer follow-up questions to things I've already talked about. And then what I will do is save new questions as a like topic for next time. Okay. Yeah, I think we are okay. DM orthotics. So DM orthotics clothing is specifically done by a prescription. So there's two ranges. They have like a generic range that you can buy on the website, and they've got a specific like bespoke range that's made for you that needs to be fitted and measured by somebody with appropriate DMO training, who is also either a physio, an OT, or an orthotist. So generally speaking, it's easiest if you go via orthotics on the NHS or find a private orthotist with DMO training. If you contact DMO, they can find you your nearest fitter and let you know. So that's useful. And again, Josh, thank you very much for putting some advice in there. I think that is everything for now. Okay. Thank you. I think we're going to stop there. It's a good stopping point, and I'll write down all the questions and we'll go over them next time. Okay, so last little thing to share coming up. So on the 29th at 7 p.m. BST, there is a chair yoga session with Claire, which will be definitely worth checking out. If exercise is a useful thing to you, Jeannie de Bon also has a hypermobility and posture session on the 31st of 13th of the 9th. Obviously, I can't read at the moment. 13th of the 9th as well. So check those out. There are details in the chat from my glamorous assistant. Link Fairy, and then members craft and chat social as well. So please do check those out, especially if you're a member, for the craft and chat social thing as well. I will write down any and all questions from this session that did not get answered. If you would like your questions prioritized for next time, you can ask them in advance, either by contacting the HMSA via social media or via email on info@hypermobility.org. Or you can comment on any of the social media advertising posts for this event, or you can contact me via Facebook. I am OT Jo Southall. And hopefully that will be a useful thing for everyone. I think we are done. That is it. So thank you all very much. And please do come back next time, especially if you haven't had your question answered this time. It will be the third Thursday of every single month, 7 p.m. UK time. And yeah, hope to see you again. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.